Hello and welcome to this week's Freshet Friday podcast, where we catch up with the latest news from Burnaby, New Westminster, and the Tri-Cities with the Freshet News team. For listeners who don't know much about Freshet News, it's a local newspaper published twice a month, a local news website that's updated daily, and now a local news podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Wheelwright, and with me on the podcast this week are the veteran journalists and founders of Freshet News, Mario Bartel, Janis, Theresa McManus, and Cornelia Naylor. And we have something a little rare and unique this week. Our team has been making news. Our very own Janis and Mario were in Ottawa last week addressing the Canadian Heritage Inquiry on the state of journalism. Here's just a taste of what they had to say.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak at this committee. My name is Mario Bartel.
And my name is Janis Cleugh. And along with Theresa McManus and Cornelia Naylor, we are the co-founders of Freshet News, the first nonprofit news cooperative in Western Canada that's union supported. We are veteran community news reporters, editors, paginators, with more than 100 years of combined experience covering New Westminster, Burnaby, and the Tri-Cities in British Columbia, approximately 600,000 people outside of the city of Vancouver. Last April, Glacier Media, now called Lodestar Media, closed our 3 online publications, the New Westminster Record, Burnaby Now, and Tri-City News, in the middle of the federal election. It meant we couldn't cover the all-candidates meetings, our candidates couldn't get their messaging out, and our readers were lost about who to vote for. This is dangerous to democracy.
When I originally landed at the Tri-City News in 1991, virtually every community in the Lower Mainland was served by at least 2 local papers. Consolidation and closures winnowed that down to 1 in most communities by 2015. Then, in August 2023, the same month our Meta social media shut down, Glacier Media stopped printing our newspapers altogether. The company said online was the only way forward. It wasn't. Less than 2 years later, 5 rapidly growing cities and 2 villages immediately east of Vancouver were left with little or no local news source. That meant decisions made at city halls and school boards got no independent coverage. There were no stories about young athletes and emerging artists, no coverage of local events, festivals, parades.
What may have been no longer economically viable to Glacier Media was untenable to the journalists who have dedicated their careers to sharing those stories. After all, we live in those communities too. So the 4 of us got together with a co-op developer, and with the support of our union, Unifor Local 2000, we put together a plan to keep our communities informed. We spent the summer and early fall of 2025 learning about co-op structures and governance, fundraising, and doing community outreach. People told us they didn't know what was happening in their hometowns anymore.
On October 15th, we launched Freshet News Online, a single title covering all our communities. It's named for the annual spring runoff from the northern snows that washed down the Fraser River past our cities. It symbolizes renewal, a fresh start. 2 months later, we revived a print edition. We're monthly for now, but we plan to increase to twice a month in April, with our ultimate goal to return to weekly publication. We're 4 journalists who never had to give much thought to the business side of our craft, the ads that ran between our stories, and the distribution network that got those stories to readers.
The learning curve has been steep, but our journalism skill set has made us adept to changing gears when needed. The communities are responding. Our website traffic grows every week, as do subscriptions to our weekly email newsletter. Advertisers are eager to get into our newspaper, and readers are scooping up the newspapers, 20,000 of them, from our distribution points at city halls, community and cultural recreation hubs, grocery stores, coffee shops, and barber shops, senior residences. We even get calls to replenish.
We truly feel our model of nonprofit, locally rooted journalism that's accountable to the communities we serve is a way forward as corporate media gives up. But what we're doing is not new. In fact, across the United States, as corporate media abandons communities due to lack of profits, reporter-led news organizations and collectives are filling the gap. Still, supports are lacking for journalism startups in Canada. We've come this far mostly on a volunteer basis as we continue looking for jobs. Our severance and EI benefits have dried up. Our fundraising at community events and through an online crowdfunding platform has comprised mostly small individual donations, $10, $25, $100 at a time. We don't have charitable status, so we can't issue tax receipts that might shake loose transformative big money support. Foundation funding frequently looks for a proven history, something that's difficult for a startup to provide. Grant opportunities are often like fitting a square peg into a round hole, and the few that are journalism specific, like the Local Journalism Initiative, are already oversubscribed and don't provide funding for critical supports like hiring ad reps who can bring in ad revenue or covering costs like software subscriptions, insurance, printing, and distribution.
Make no mistake, many of the media's industry's wounds are self-inflicted. Too much growth too quickly back when times were flush, too much consolidation, too many resources expended chasing bad ideas, too many owners that are investors rather than people who believe in the mission of news. Those owners would have us believe the news business is dead. But from our experience in the past few months, since we started Freshet News, has been quite the opposite. People want to be connected to each other and their communities, free from algorithms. Businesses want to share their stories with local customers, and journalists want to be able to write and keep sharing the stories. Putting community back into community news is the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very effective use of sharing your time. And as a former community reporter, I really appreciate your efforts. Thank you for all you're doing.
With that, I'll turn things over to the two of you to talk about how you were received by the committee, what you learned, the questions that were asked of you, and the many questions I'm sure you asked them. Mario, do you want to kick this off?
Well, we were invited to speak to this committee to present our story. Kind of caught us out by surprise, but it's quite something for us to be able to get a national platform for what we're trying to do here. So yeah, it was quite the scene. You go into the House of Commons, into the Parliament, West Block, and there's a large committee room there. There's representatives from each of the major parties. I think there was 5 Liberal representatives, 4 Conservative MPs, and 1 from the Bloc Québécois. They comprise the committee. There's expert analysts there too. And it's part of a whole process. There's several hearings going on. There was another one on the Thursday of the week we were there. And the quite diverse topics. The day we were there was a former CBC host who had some interesting things to say about his time at CBC. There was a representative there from Honest Reporting Canada, who was alleging anti-Jewish bias in the Canadian media. And then there was ourselves. There was a representative from community radio in Quebec. We had a good synergy with her because they face many of the same problems we do in the newspaper industry. There was also representatives from news media. There was the president of News Media Canada, and also from Friends of Canadian Media.
Fantastic. And Janis, what surprised you in the questions that you were asked, or maybe some of the things that some of the other people talking to the committee had to say?
Well, first we presented and we were given 5 minutes each. And we talked about how rebuilding local news is very important and how moving forward in the journalism circles in Canada might be better as a nonprofit model. And we were talking a little bit about how we came to be. Then we had some questions from the Liberals and from the Conservatives. And I don't know, having questions launched at you in French, even though my French is okay, it's not that good. And they were tough questions. They were tough questions about, what does it mean to community when there's no news there? How do you fill the gap? And Mario also got questions. And it was basically a bit surreal, to be honest, because there were different narratives happening around us. There was allegations about bias, CBC, and discrimination. There was pleas for more funding for 2 co-ops, radio and newsprint. And then there was some solutions that were being offered by the Friends of Canadian Media, as well as News Media Canada. So everyone had a really interesting point of view, and half the questions were tough, especially in French.
Yeah, and I thought in your statement, you made a really interesting point in terms of like when the local media that you were working for disappeared in the middle of an election, the kind of impact that had. And I wonder if you wanted to just talk about how people reacted to that.
How the readers or how the people in the inquiry?
Well, I mean, either or both.
I mean, as we had said, it's quite dangerous to democracy when you remove media from communities. And we had just in the Tri-Cities, we had candidates they had strong points of view. We couldn't go to the all candidates meetings. and voters were really struggling to figure out, who to vote for. But anyway, that's just Freshet News.
I think it was interesting that we were there as two journalists who've been in the trenches for many years, and when you're in a room with people from the CBC and national organizations, I thought it was a good voice to have in there. And the chair of the committee, Lisa Hepner, is a former TV journalist herself from Hamilton. She's a Liberal MP, and she recognized, she's worked in a small newsroom in CHCH in Hamilton, and recognizes how important community news coverage is. And I think we're seeing politicians are really sensitive to this because, as Janis said, losing media coverage in the middle of an election is not good for democracy. Now, where do voters turn to get an unbiased recording of what candidates are saying and what the issues are in town, and having people ask questions of the candidates? Politicians recognize this. This is not good for them in the long run, and it creates division in communities and polarizes people when they're just going to the internet and social media for their information. So, there's a lot of problems in our industry. A lot of them are self-inflicted, but I think having this committee, we don't know what will come of it. Apparently, there'll be the analysts will go through all the material that's submitted over the various hearings they have and come up with some sort of report. And then from there, I imagine if there's some legislation that would be introduced or some programs that it may influence, hopefully something good comes of it. And the thing we were asking for is there needs to be supports for smaller efforts like ours, because as Janis said, I think we think something like what we're doing is the future. Corporate media is giving up. They're just throwing up their hands and saying, well, we're not making the kind of profits we want to make anymore, so we're out. And what steps in on a smaller scale? Efforts like Freshet News might be the future, and it's something that other communities can probably emulate as well. As we go forward and have success, I think we're going to see more and more people looking at this kind of model as well. And if government can play a role to support that, then it's good for everybody.
Yeah, you both made a really good point, and I think it was you, Janice, that was talking about in terms of grant applications, for example. It's often we're like a round peg in a square hole. There are a few things that actually are a straightforward fit for what we're trying to do.
Yeah, it's been kind of a difficult process to scale up grants. I think I've applied for 30 grants and been successful on 3. Thankfully, through the city of New Westminster, we're taking an educational program, learning how to raise the right revenue and how to go about this a little more effectively. Because right now it's, we haven't been in business for a year, so we don't qualify for those grants, and we got payroll from 2024, and on it goes. We are always looking to fundraise. I also wanted to point out part of Ottawa that we were there on the invitation of Zoe Royer, who is the Liberal MP for Port Moody Coquitlam. And during our trip, she was very gracious, and she showed us around the House of Commons. And we have a special story to tell you about that on our last day. Mary, you want to take it?
Well, yeah, Zoe's a member of the committee, and according to the rules of the committee, each member was allowed to, was invited to invite someone that would be relevant to the committee. So Zoe decided our story was worth sharing, and we're thankful for that, because I think, like I said, I think we have a voice in something like this. It's not just about the CBC. It's not just about Post Media and the large corporations. It's saving local journalism is about local efforts, rebuilding from the bottom up. Zoe was able to get us passes to question period. I went to school in Ottawa for 4 years. I never took advantage of something like that, so it was kind of a new experience, and it's very interesting. I mean, the halls of Parliament truly are hallowed. I mean, there's a lot of wood and history there. Zoe showed us the room of remembrance, where large books with the names of all of Canada's war veterans are inscribed in calligraphy through the various wars. And she told it, and they're all under glass cases, and the lighting's very subdued, and the floor is lit like it's maple leaves on the floor, and stars, and the light dappling through from the ceiling is meant to emulate the light dappling through the maple trees, and it's very hushed, And apparently someone comes in, it's their job every morning to come in and lift the glass case up and turn a page so that
Wow.
every day the names are different. I mean, there's the reverence and respect for something like that is you can feel it in the walls and when you're there, and it's quite something. And then going into question period was really interesting. I mean, it's very, we see the little tidbits we see on TV where members ask questions and the prime minister or a cabinet minister steps up and gives an answer. And when you're there, it's very much theater. You see there's a lot of heckling going on. There's a lot of jibes being thrown across the floor. There's a lot of MPs moving around. And at one point, Zoe saw her opportunity to go down and sit beside the prime minister because the seat next to him was empty for a few moments. And she started chatting with him. And next thing you know, they're both looking our way. And Mark Carney gives us a wave. So we waved back. And I think that the neat thing from that is Freshet News was put into his ear. And again, it's a small thing, it's a small moment, but for us, it's a big moment in that, it shows we're getting people's attention and the work we've put in all these past months to build this up is starting to gain some foothold, and hopefully we can keep the momentum going and long enough that if any government supports do come from something like this that can help efforts like ours, then it'll be good for the long-term health of local news.
So I have two questions for you. So last week, a lot was happening in Parliament, and I think you were there on a pretty opportune day. What was your big takeaway?
It's a lot of theater. We were there the first day the new Liberal MP who just crossed over from the NDP from Calloway, I believe, was there. So she started the question period sitting beside the Prime Minister, and he introduced her, and there was some jibes from the opposition side. There was a great standing ovation from the Liberal side. Then the question period started, and the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, he asked the same question about 5 different times, and the Prime Minister gave his answer. Then he gave the same answer again in a few different words, and then a cabinet minister got up and gave pretty much the same answer, and you wonder how anything gets done. But again, it's an opportunity for MPs prior to question period. The MPs get an opportunity to make member statements, and they would. I don't know what the protocol is. Clearly, there's a list that the speaker goes through, and they're able to speak about passion projects or things going on in their riding or something important they want to say. And the key is it all gets put into the record of Canada, and these discussions will forever live on. It's much as when we launched and Ron McKinnon, the MP from Coquitlam, got up and told a bit of our story and during member statements. And now, Freshet News will be forever in the record of Canada.
That is fantastic. So moving away from the MPs and the politicians for a minute, what did your colleagues in the media have to ask you? I mean, it's a bit of an inspiring story, really, particularly for people who care about media and media independence in Canada. I can imagine that some of the other journalists who were there would have taken an interest and asked you some questions about how you've achieved what you've done.
Well, ironically, there were no reporters there. We were the only reporters on the panel. There were more reporters actually on the inquiry committee than there were on the panel. And that should tell you a lot. There were 3 journalists who are now MPs who are sitting on the journalism committee, and there were 2 reporters sitting in front of them. So that's the state of journalism Canada.
And the reporters that were in the gallery were more interested in the CBC's accusations than a small local news effort trying to bring local news back to the communities around Vancouver, which is fair.
We watched a scrum around a Conservative MP, and things were crackling at that point because you could tell something was happening. Sure enough, we had a crossing of the floor, and throughout the that last day, it was very palpable that the Liberals were very excited. It was only 2 seats away until they get majority, and that's where their heads were, intentionally luring people over to their side, and this one was effective this day.
Yeah, no, a fascinating moment to be there. Thank you both for that. So I want to turn locally again. And Cornelia, I know you've been doing some work on this story about Burnaby Hospital, and I wanted to hear a bit more about that.
Okay. Yeah, that was one of the bigger stories coming out of Burnaby. I mean, the announcement over the second phase of the Burnaby Hospital redevelopment didn't happen this week or this month. It was announced in the budget in February that phase 2 of the Burnaby Hospital Hospital redevelopment project was going to be delayed, where it was going to be put on pause. The word used in the budget was repacing, which has caused all kinds of consternation locally. But there was a big lull in terms of the response to that. It was big news, but there was nobody was really talking about it in town. At one point, the mayor put out a statement saying that there needed to be more clarity about what repacing meant and, why Burnaby, why were they chosen? There are other Lower Mainland hospital projects going ahead. Why Burnaby? Why is it being paused? And then after that, there wasn't much. But last week, the Burnaby Hospital Foundation, which has really been working behind the scenes, approaching donors, running a really successful campaign, 10,000 donors, I think is more than $20 million for phase 2 alone, suddenly became very vocal in a way that I haven't seen them before. Mostly I think of them as people who put on a beautiful gala. They marshaled their resources, their information, their data, and put out a couple of statements and really calling on the province to make sure that project goes ahead, to define what repacing means, to commit to a solid start date for that project. The project was approved in September 2023, and it was a complete shock to President and CEO of the foundation, Christy James, that it was being paused. She was shocked and horrified. And so it took them a while to get their ducks in a row and to put out a statement. What they say is that the delay is going to ultimately add to more costs. It's going to damage donor trust. And they point to an inequity in healthcare that's existed in Burnaby for decades. For example, the BC average for hospital beds per 1,000 population, the BC average is 1.46. In Burnaby, it's 0.58 today. And by 2032, they expect it to be 0.41, whereas in Vancouver, it's 2.9. Surrey, it's 1.0. So they point to a real need for the hospital. That's why it was approved. And they say that need isn't going away. It's going to get more, acute. So they've really gone on the offensive in terms of trying to get the government to make this, to continue this project, to commit to a start date. The mayor's chimed in. He was the one who put out the first statement. Burnaby Board of Trade has also called on the government to be clear on what repacing means and to commit to a start date. And we reached out to the infrastructure minister, Bowen Ma. She sent us an emailed statement saying that there were concerns that the updated cost estimates for the project came in, quote unquote, significantly over budget. And a recent independent report has raised concerns about how the project was being delivered. So that all sounds very serious, and that's going to require some follow-up to find out, what are these concerns? What is this independent report? So basically, local residents have been calling for an upgrade to this hospital for decades. It was built in 1952. The last major upgrade before this redevelopment was 1978. So they were very excited that the project was approved. Now it's a really big disappointment to see that second phase isn't going ahead. Yeah, so that was the big news around that.
So repacing, does that mean anything other than delay right now? I mean, absent any further clarification from the minister.
It definitely means delay. It's an interesting choice of words. I think it's what's making people call for clarity. What does repacing mean? It is a pause. That's for sure.
Well, and it sounds like it's not the only part of the provincial budget that our municipalities are making a call on this week. Theresa, you had a great story about the pressures on education budgets in New West this week.
Yeah, I tuned into part of the New Westminster School Board's meeting where they had different presentations from their different partner groups. So the Teachers Union, CUPE, the DPAC, and then the Principals and Vice Principals Association. And they were all outlining their wish lists for the coming school year. And I think that the majority of them were talking about the need for really addressing the needs of students with complex needs and EAs and custodians, that sort of thing. But at the end of that meeting, the school board chair, she thanked everyone for their input and their ideas and their commitments, but noted that things are really tough in education and school districts across the province are facing growing pressures. And I think her comment was it's going to be some very challenging decisions in the coming weeks. So stay tuned.
We shall. All right. So, Teresa, I just wanted to ask you, we've seen quite a few stories over the recent weeks about school lockdowns in our communities. And I'm wondering if you're seeing any common threads there or anything that you're hearing from any of the school boards about how they should be thinking about them.
I haven't heard anything from any of the schools other than when the incidents have been occurring. They've taken the threats very seriously. The police have come out immediately. There's two last week at Burnaby North Secondary, and neither one of them were serious. But the principal at the school, he did, he expressed concern that, dealing with something like that is a real struggle, and it's a real heavy weight on the community. Fortunately, when that happened, it went into spring break right after that, so they get a bit of a reprieve. And this follows up at the end in February. I know Janis had covered a number of incidents out in the Tri-Cities, so someone's making some havoc there in the school system. So
Janice, do you have anything to add?
Well, as a result of the, ongoing shutdowns at the schools, that does affect both of my children. They're both in high school, and so it is kind of scary when these things do happen. Anyway, they were happening repeatedly, and the school district has put out a notification. And there is an emergency preparedness day happening on May 14th, and it's district wide. It's to get ready for possible shutdowns, lockdowns, whatever happens to the school. So they are taking proactive measures in School District 43.
Great. Thank you for that. Okay, and switching tracks here, Mario, I want to talk to you a bit about sports, and particularly about what's been happening at SFU with the hockey team. I read your story, and it seems like there's a bittersweet moment happening there.
Sports up at SFU have become a bit of a mess recently. In mid-February, I think it was, the school quietly released a statement saying it was going to it's canceling its hockey and field lacrosse programs. They're both club programs, so they're not in the varsity realm. So the students don't get scholarships. They pretty much pay their own way. They pay to play. So you can imagine it can cost thousands of dollars for these student athletes on top of their academic fees and living expenses to be able to play the games they love. SFU has two hockey programs. One is kind of a barnstorming team. It's the players are mostly former WHL players, a lot of them from the prairies. They go down and they travel a lot in the States, playing schools like the University of Michigan and up in Alaska Fairbanks. Fairly big, well-known NCAA hockey programs. The other team plays in a smaller league that's based in British Columbia called the BC Intercollegiate Hockey League. There's the University of Victoria, Vancouver Island University, and a university from the Okanagan and SFU. And they just wrapped up their season as well. So both of those teams are now gone, although the school did say in its statement that it was hoping the BCIHL team would find a way to continue. But last weekend, I was noodling around on social media and saw a post from the University of Michigan that sort of struck a chord. And it was SFU's last exhibition game from that barnstorming team was against the University of Michigan in the beautiful old arena that the team plays in down in Ann Arbor. And both teams were lined up with each other as a big group photo. And the tag on X said something like, some things are just bigger than hockey. And they recognized that this was the last game for the SFU hockey program. And I did a little bit of searching and found a video that had been posted online of Mark Coletta, the SFU coach, addressing the team prior to the game. And it was a little bit of an emotional address, recognizing that this was out of their hands. He was proud of the team and how they'd done and stuck through with their dreams. But they couldn't do anything about this decision. And it's just the latest in a series of decisions up on Burnaby Mountain that have really impacted athletics up there. The school's had quite a history. And when SFU started, it was part of the NAIA, which is a smaller colleges and universities in the States. It was unique then for a Canadian university to be part of an American college program, and that continued on into the 90s. And then a decision was made. I don't remember exactly when it was. I think the late 90s that they leave the NAIA and come back to Canadian Intercollegiate Sports, the CIS as it was then known. Were able to play teams up at SFU. Were able to play UBC, UVic, the Canadian universities. And then just trying to check my notes here, I think it was in 2010, if you join the NCAA in Division II. That's the university level that is pretty renowned. Division I's the top schools, the big schools like University of Michigan. SFU was not that big a school, but it came into the NCAA. That allowed it to offer full ride scholarships to student athletes. And everyone thought this was This will make SFU unique. It'll be a great recruiting tool. It worked for a while, but then it all started to come undone a few years ago when the football team ran out of teams to play. A lot of the schools at the level that SFU was competing at were no longer having football programs, and the school was wandering around looking for a conference that it could play in, and eventually settled in a Texas conference. Now, the football team had never been very successful in the NCAA. They lost a lot of games by large scores, but it's a local option for kids who were looking for football scholarships. They could stay close to home, and the program was trying hard, but the Texas thing didn't work out. And then in 2023, I think the school decided that it would pause the football program, and then last January, in January 2025, it decided to pull the plug altogether, and that's kind of led to a whole cascade of examining athletics at SFU. They brought in a consultant, and he did a study of what the advantages of it would be to stay in the NCAA, what some of the disadvantages are, and he finally filed a report last fall that said, the school could save a lot of money if it came back to youth sports, as the CIS is now called, repatriate athletics. Of course, that means they can't offer full ride scholarships anymore, and it also meant the demise of several programs like golf and outdoor track and field, because CIS doesn't have those programs. So there's been a lot of tumult and turmoil up there, and the hockey and lacrosse were just kind of the latest to fall victim of that. The school did it very quietly. They didn't make anybody available for comment. They released the news on a Friday afternoon. When I reached out to some of the teams after I was given a heads up by a lacrosse alumnus, nobody wanted to talk, and some of the teams were just absorbing the information themselves and really didn't know what it meant.
Yeah.
So it's been pretty heart-wrenching for the student athletes up there, and the coaches and everybody involved, and probably hasn't been handled in the best way. We'll see what happens if the BCIHL team can find a way to continue. I know after I did my story, Tally Campbell, the general manager of the Coquitlam Express junior hockey team, reached out and said, can you put me in touch? There we might be able to find some common ground and find a way to work with them in some way, because a lot of the kids who play for that team, the BCIHL team, are former BCHL junior hockey players who have decided to continue their hockey careers close to home, didn't get scholarships to American colleges, but were able to find a way to continue getting an education and playing hockey.
Well, I wish them luck.
They're going to need it, which is a shame, because SFU has great facilities. They built a little stadium up on Burnaby Mountain with the intent for the football team. Of course, then the football team left, so now the soccer teams get to take advantage, and they have some great student athletes have gone through there. Many of them from the Tri-Cities and Burnaby and New West have all had really good careers up there, and to see this kind of turmoil for them, it can't be easy.
Well, I hope at some point they all get to have their careers and their history celebrated, because it sounds like there were a lot of moments along the years. On that note, I'm going to turn to something that's hopefully a bit brighter. Janice, I know we've got a lot going on in our community. We recently just had Janice and I were both fortunate enough to attend the Festival du Bois in Coquitlam, which was a lot of fun. We got a contest coming up, in fact, a couple of contests, and lots happening on our calendar. Do you want to talk a bit about that, Janice?
Yeah, just circle back to Festival du Bois. What an honor to be there. It was an anniversary party for Delhi to Dublin, and there was lots of music around the fiddle, and congratulations to them. I mean, they just knock it out of the park every year. But I really wanted to highlight what's going up for this weekend and next week, and another fantastic company that's you can always put your money on them. The Arts Club Theatre, and they have a touring production, and it just finished up at the Evergreen Cultural Center in Coquitlam. It's called The Golden Anniversaries. It is getting really good reviews, and it stars two people, Ellen Barrett and Peter Anderson, and it's about them finding out that maybe they don't like each other after 50 years of marriage. And it's coming to the Anvil Theatre in Westminster, March 19th and 20th. So that's tonight, Friday night. And then next week, March 24th and 25th, to the Chabot Centre of the Arts. And I really recommend you see this. It's a great show. Arts Club Theatre always does a great production. They've got their own, costume designers and set producers. And this is a very simple, stripped down production where it focuses on the two actors, and basically it's a love letter.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it's a good show.
Speaking of love letters, Cornelia, I wanted to talk to you a bit about a potential love letter to Burnaby in the form of a sign that sounds like it isn't going to be happening right now.
Yeah, this is something that goes back to January 2025 when Councillor James Wang put out a notice of motion to say he wanted staff to look into the possibility of a big landmark, splashy landmark sign that people would be able to take selfies in front of. You might remember that in Vancouver, they had a red sign with white lights, and it said Vancouver. It was in Cole Harbour, and people could take selfies with it. It was very popular. People lined up. I think when Taylor Swift was in town, I think it was called Swift Coover. I think they maybe something like that. Maybe I'm not remembering that correctly. And maybe that's what motivated this. But he and council supported it. Then staff came back after looking into the viability, feasibility of this and what it might cost. They came back in May 2025 with 3 options to pursue it as a piece of public art. I forget what the actual option was there. One was to have a tourism focus and to work with Tourism Burnaby. The last was to include it in a future operating budget request. And council went with option 2, which was to approach Tourism Burnaby and to propose, maybe pitch the idea of Tourism Burnaby commissioning a sign and then later gifting it or selling it to the city. And just last month, I think it was the last council meeting in February, staff came back and said that while Tourism Burnaby was at first interested in the idea, they've since come back and said that they're unable to fund and or advance the project at this time. So staff said, well, the cost of it would be about $600,000. Because it wasn't included in the latest 5-year financial plan, staff proposed instead to go with a quote unquote living logo, which is, sometimes you'll see in cities where they spell out their name in flowers or plants. That was what was in the staff report, is that, there were examples for Coquitlam had its name spelled out. Victoria had its name spelled out in flowers. And so at first I assumed that this living logo would spell out the name Burnaby. It turns out no, it's just their logo that's going to be that's going to be represented in plants. I don't know if you've seen the Burnaby logo. I honestly can't imagine how that's going to work. But but apparently this logo is going to go, and council did go with this idea. I don't think they had any choice, because staff said this was definitely the more fiscally responsible way to go. So because they said they could do it within the existing horticulture budget, so they are going to put their, there were no details about which plants we're going to use, but it's going to be on the corner of Boundary and Kingsway. So it's a big entry into the city. Would it be a nice place for a splashy sign? But now we're going to get a logo and plants.
So like a giant chia pet or something.
Yeah, that would work because the sign is green. The logo is green.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, that is an idea to plant for the next year, I guess.
Indeed.
On that note, I'm wondering if we can just talk for a minute about your favorite stories of the week, either stories that you've been working on or stories that have been published. And Mario, maybe I'll start with you.
Well, I spent the afternoon today with the Junior Firefighters program in Coquitlam. It's an opportunity for high school kids to learn what it is to be a firefighter. All hands on. They get some training, and then they get to go out and play with the hoses and climb ladders and do aerial rescue work. It's an assignment I enjoy every year. It happens during March break, and it was nice to get out there this year. And I tried to. Often we end up doing the aerial ladder, the aerial rescue stuff. That happens on the Thursday. Last year I went on a Wednesday, and they did the car extrication, pulling the cars apart with the jaws of life. And so this year I went up, and they were doing fire extinguisher and hose work and going into the enclosed spaces with smoke. And it's kind of fun watching the kids learn this, their enthusiasm, and the firefighters kind of barking orders at them and showing them the ropes of the work. It's hard physical labor. So that'll be running in our next sprint edition on.
Fantastic. Teresa, how about you?
I interviewed Emily. She's the manager of the New West Farmers Market, and I'm working on a story about this year's market, which gets underway on March something or other. I'll check that out for you. And March 26th, and they're having an opening day block party. So we chatted about what's coming up with that and what the season ahead is going to look like. And one of the things that she told me was that they're bringing back their paw parade, and it's when animals can dress up and strut themselves on a runway. So I am so looking forward to that and hoping that maybe we might even convince Mario to get out there and get some doggy in costume photos at some point this season. As for other stories that I liked, I really did. The civic nerd in me really enjoyed the story that Cornelia had done about Burnaby Hospital, but I also really liked the story that Mario had done about the Port Moody Fire Department. It was just a story about how that fire department is preparing for a denser future. But one of the things within his story that I thought was so cool was he had some details that I think you wouldn't necessarily find unless you were like a local community publication. Nobody from Vancouver is going to, really probably jump out and go, oh, how many calls for service did the Port Moody Fire Department get? But he had some really interesting facts in there. And I encourage folks to go to the Freshet website and read that.
That sounds great. Cornelia, how about you?
Well, again, civic nerd, as as Theresa was saying. Just by accident, I keep writing about parking stories. But there's another one that was discussed at the last council meeting, where there's these 3 city-owned lots in the Heights on Pender Street, just off the Heights on Hastings Street there. And the staff had recommended spending some money for a feasibility study. Apparently, those lots were always destined to be parking lots for off-street parking when the HOV lanes came in on Hastings. One of the compromises or solutions was to have this city-owned off-street parking. Now staff is finally recommending to move on it, especially with the bus rapid transit coming in. They're concerned more about losing on-street parking, and there's a debate on council. Some councillors want to go ahead and just get those parking lots built. Others want to refer to staff and find out whether those lots could be used for something else, including housing. So that's a story that's coming up from Burnaby.
And what about you, Janis? What's your highlight for the week?
Well, right before the podcast, I was at Town Center Park where they had the Chaharshanbe Suri Festival, which is the Persian Fire Festival. They do this every year. It's the last Wednesday before Nowruz, which is the Iranian New Year. And this year is especially exciting for them because they are happy about regime change. I have some photos from today's event, and it's still going strong right across the street.
Wow.
So there's a lot of electronic music and a lot of that was a very interesting night to get to have the opportunity to speak to the Iranians and the Persians about what is happening in their country.
Wow, I look forward to that. Thank you for that, Janis. Wonderful. Well, my favorite story for the week was actually one of Janis's. It was the story about Bill Semple and Darlene Cooper's new album, It's All About Love. It always appreciate local music and local musicians, and just hearing the story of the album and the couple that's behind the album was inspiring. So thank you, Janis, for that. And it was released on Valentine's Day, which I thought was very cool. So that wraps it up another week of the Freshet Friday podcast, but we'll be back soon. In the meantime, keep asking yourself the question, is it Freshet Friday yet? And come on back when the answer is yes. Thanks to our team for being here, and thanks to you for listening, and have a great weekend.